I don't want to dwell too much on this, but there's a lot of headlines, and there's always the impulse to, I mean, I don't even know what it is. Maybe it's just as simple as it's a counterintuitive take that will create clickbait. But the Washington Post says, televangelist Pat Robertson claims Alabama abortion bill is extreme and has gone too far. Now, what does that make you think when you guys read that headline? What's your first thought?
It's too crazy even for these crazy conservatives. Wow, they've really gone too far this time. Even Pat Robertson is terrified that a 12-year-old rape victim might be forced to keep the baby or face criminal charges. Even Pat Robertson gets that, right? Matt, what did you take from that headline? Same sort of reaction? Do you guys want to go to the tape? I feel like Jon Stewart here. We do have tape of what he actually said. Or in fact, if you read the body of the text, we could go to what he's actually saying.
I think Alabama has gone too far. They've passed a law that would give a 99-year prison sentence to people who commit abortion. There's no exception for rape or incest. It's an extreme law, and they want to challenge Roe versus Wade. But my humble view is that this is not the case we want to bring to the Supreme Court, because I think this one will lose.
So that's a strategic argument. He might be right on the strategy, but this is not a moral objection to a fundamental assault on women's sovereignty. And I really think in a time where you're talking about putting doctors for performing a procedure in jail for 99 years, and you are absolutely terrorizing women in these states and across the country, it's just not the time for the dumb counterintuitive clickbait. What's this, Ben Shapiro?
He doesn't have the strategic concerns that Pat Robertson has.
Wait, really? The guy from the intellectual dark web, the New York Times cool kid philosopher, that really smart guy because he uses Jerusalem and Athens in his book? No.
If you believe that a human life is a human life in the womb, the fact that a grave wrong was done to initiate the creation of that life does not mean that the life itself is of no value. There's a logical distinction between the evil that was done to create the life in the first place and the presence of the life now that the life is present. That's why I've always been in favor of an exception in case of serious danger to the mother, and that would include mental health. If a woman is going to go crazy and harm herself, for example, if a woman is going to be so depressed that she becomes suicidal, then abortion, in my view, becomes an option, because now the mother's life is in danger.
Well, he's trying to create a backdoor out for himself, right?
And not
there.
like that leads to any weird, awful incentives.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's an even more. That's a whole other totally disturbing,
like
draconian,
the catch-22 for abortion.
Yeah, I mean, this is, and again, I mean, ultimately. I don't know. I just think it's, these things are settled legally. And I know that Roe is written in a way, because, sorry to go all postmodernist here, but law is constructed. Law is a political project. It is not a natural thing that has descended from the sky. But we have made a basic political moral judgment that women's capacity to control their own bodies, their own sovereignty, their own life trajectory is going to supersede the potential of life. Which I think really, the potential of a human life. And again, there's no... We're also in a time here where the president and Fox News is literally going out across the country lying, saying that people are actually suggesting that fully born babies can be killed. So
Ben Shapiro's suggesting that too. Here's a bit more.
Danger, and you stake her life against the life of the human life in her womb. Alabama, I think, by the way, does the right thing. From a pro-life perspective when it comes to rape and incest, concessions with regard to rape and incest have always been sort of a sop to public opinion rather than a principled stand about the value of human life. They also open the door to the argument, okay, well, if you are saying that a human life is not a human life if you don't want it to be a human life, then why wouldn't you extend that to cases other than rape and incest? It's also worthwhile noting that the left tends to point out arguments about rape and incest because those are the most emotionally resonant cases. in which people who are generally pro-life would say, well, maybe an abortion should be on the table.
Yeah, I think it is pretty emotionally resonant that a 12-year-old girl in Ohio might be forced to keep her rapist child in a way that might totally physically overwhelm her body because men have voted to control her sovereignty. I think that is actually pretty emotionally relevant to sentient human beings, even very flawed human beings. If you have the most basic capacity to think outside whatever sort of bizarre religious, isolated, empathy-free fanaticism that Ben Shapiro is living in.
It's like he needs a guidebook. Like, here's the psychopath's guide to what is emotionally resonant.
Right. And again, look, Ben Burgess will be releasing a tape in a few days where he sort of explains the logical fallacy of asserting, basically a continuum fallacy, right? Like, because frankly, and I'm sorry to get kind of gross here, but I mean, if you want to go on a continuum fallacy and if you want to follow the logic of what Ben Shapiro is saying, masturbating should be illegal, right? Like, that literally is a you're getting rid of and I don't want to be gross here, but like, you're disposing of something that, if it meets another thing, can create a person. So you could even call that discarding human life.
It's human biology.
It is literally human biology. So what we do in a sane world is we make a distinction, right? Like, and again, I don't think that this is, I do think that this argument is actually one that does need to kind of be foundationally built on different politics and different value sets. But like, the way he is able to do, by the way, and then articulate to his young fans such an incredibly totalitarian, horrifying policy as the one in Alabama. But, because, you walk by a tree on the street in Brooklyn does not mean you're in a forest, right? Like, if you want to just talk on like a continuum fallacy, if you think that an embryo is the same as a delivered baby, you're not able to make basic distinctions in your mind. So he's using, a fast voice and quote unquote logic to draw an insane equivalency and collapse basic distinctions that any person using an empirical sort of guide stick would make. And it is also great. I think Hassan Piker made this point on Twitter, like, that this is sort of like the end. If you see the IDW's roots in atheist YouTube, it goes from, complaining about evangelicals and certainly, of course, having endless tantrums about Muslims to, having a guy. I'm sure Sam Harris, I'm sure he probably opposes the Alabama bill, but he'd be willing to have a, calm, dreary conversation about Ben Shapiro. But one of the leading lights of supposedly all of this sort of logic lord stuff supports the most totalitarian bill imaginable. And, I'll just say, I think these points are generally stupid one way or another, but Iran, abortion totally publicly available.